All right, seventh gear over at fans. We have another whale of a guest for you today. This is as the old Ed Sullivan used to say, a really big shoe. We have a guy that has been in the motorsports industry for a long, long time. He's made his name, he's cut his chops as an engineer, aerodynamicist, all the way back into the '80s, doing aerodynamics for the old LaRousse team. So I don't even know where to start with this guy because he's so incredibly qualified. He's in the perfect spot, especially again, as I said, for IndyCar fans. This guy came, I hate to say came to prominence because he's always been prominent, but he's spent a lot of years with the team Cool Green, Andretti Green Racing, Andretti Racing, or Andretti Autosport, I guess is the proper term, technical director for Panther Racing for a brief bit. And now he is the head of aerodynamics for the IndyCar series. Head of aerodynamics, the one and only Mr. Tino Belli. Thank you, and welcome, Tino, to the Seventh Year Over Rev Show. How are you, my friend?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
We are more than excited about this. And, we were talking just before we started recording. You were obviously down in St. Petersburg for the IndyCar season opener last weekend. And we talked a little bit about tire strategy and how the race was relatively clean. But from your perspective, in your role, what was your overall thought on how that opener went?
Yeah, no, it's very good. We here at IndyCar, we use all the timing lines to create metrics for number of passes and how close the racing is and stuff like that. And at St. Pete, where it goes, it was an average to slightly above average race. It was nice and clean. We like to see clean racing. We do want the fastest guy to win the race. We want very fair, a very fair race, and I think we got all those objectives at St. Pete. Yeah, big crowd too.
Yeah, that was a big crowd. I mean, they often say that it's sort of like the Long Beach of the East, and then this year was no different. It certainly didn't disappoint. So you as well as everybody at the IndyCar series have to be super excited about the competitiveness of the series. And I will say, as an IndyCar and a Formula One fan, I think that the IndyCar series is even more competitive than Formula One from top to bottom. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. Like you, I'm an IndyCar fan. I'm an IMSA fan. I'm a Formula One fan. I'm a WEC. I'm a WRC fan.
Oh yeah.
You can get from my accent. I'm obviously originally from the UK, Italian parent, so you have to be a Ferrari fan.
That accent isn't from Birmingham, Alabama.
And yes, so I'll answer your question. Formula One last year had a very exciting season. It was a race, though, all season between two drivers. Whereas, here in IndyCar, the great thing that we have, I think, is that 20 drivers could win, possibly all 26 could win. And, it was great at St. Pete. We had another first-time winner, first-time pole position. I don't know what else you could really want. Everybody goes into the race weekend with an opportunity. Small teams, big teams. Obviously, the big teams are going to have more odds of winning races than the small teams, but your small teams can win as well. Rookies can win.
And I think too, I think about this over the years, and it used to be where, once you got past, the obvious guys, the Penske's, Ganassi's, Andretti, then there was a fairly noticeable drop off to the mid-tier and the lower tier teams. Now that's really not the case. I mean, you've got Arrow McLaren coming on strong. Romain Grosjean did great things with Coyne last year. And even Jimmy Johnson, who's trying to still kind of get things down in the IndyCar stuff. I mean, all of those guys are tight, and the qualifying is super tight. Why do you think it is that now, in the last couple of years, that IndyCar has gotten, not only so competitive, so tight, the entire field, but also it's attracting guys like the Romain Grosjeans and the Scotty McLaughlins and all those guys to this series as opposed to elsewhere?
Well, no disrespect to the IRL era, but a lot of drivers outside of the US, when they were very young teenagers, they saw IndyCar racing, and they saw as oval only series, and I think even Roman Grosjean will tell you that he thought it was mainly, oval racing, and not only oval racing but pack races on ovals. And a lot of these guys don't want to do that. They think it's, very dangerous. And I think we've managed now to steer the series pretty much to the way it was when I got into IndyCar racing in the early kart days. A lot of road and street racing, short oval racing, super speedway racing. And they're just seeing it as the blend. So you're seeing the Lundgaards, the Elots, the guys who may be stalling out on the road to Formula One. They're saying, hey, this isn't a super dangerous racing series anymore. Let's go and do it. And we're getting world-class drivers from all over the world.
With your experience going back to those kart days before the IRL split, and you would be probably the person to know this, because you've got a couple of Indy 500 wins under your belt. You got a number of IndyCar championships, a ton of race wins. Would you say that this kind of, everybody talked about before the kart IRL split that, like in the days when, Mansell came over and you had, Emo kind of, right in sort of like near not necessarily the twilight of his career, but he had come off of 2 Indy 500 wins there. That early 90s era, would you kind of, for lack of a better term, sort of compare the competitiveness and the popularity of the series now to where it was at that point in the early 90s time?
So competitively, I think we're even stronger. So I think the depth of the field front to back is even stronger than that early 90s, which was like massive for kart. Popularity, no, I don't think we're quite there. I think we're getting there. I think I was very excited about the crowd at St. Pete. So I don't know if you know, but we were having difficulty getting the cars through the paddock, and we actually closed the paddock like 10 minutes before a session ended to clear out all the people, so the crews could get their cars back to their tents to work on them, and then we opened the paddock up again. I haven't seen that since probably, as you say, the late 80s, early 90s. Places like Long Beach, it used to be like that all the time. So it'll be interesting to see now when we go to Long Beach in 6 weeks to see what the crowd there's like. I'm hoping it'll be great.
I have no reservations about that. Long Beach is always a strong event, and the schedule is so good this year too. In fact, I was just earlier today. I was out in Brownsburg at Ronnie Dumas's Turn 4 restoration shop, and we were talking about the Nashville event and how strong that was last year, and looking like it's going to be again this year. So you add that to, of course, Indianapolis. You've got Mid Ohio, which has always been strong. Road America, a huge fan favorite. There's a lot to like about the IndyCar series. Just between the venues, the competition, we seem to have more stars emerging, like the Pato Awards, the Scotty McLaughlins, of course you still got Scott Dixon, you still got Will Power, you've got Pagenaud and Elio now, with Shank is kind of going from that little team that could to now, being able to slug it out with the big boys, so to speak. So there's a lot to like about the IndyCar series for sure.
Well, also too, just as a side note, as far as the television ratings go, this was the largest ratings grab for IndyCar in 11 years at the last race. So that's massive. That's huge for the sport.
Absolutely, it is huge, and that's a credit to Mark Miles and Roger Penske and Jay Fry. They've been pushing that. I see an improvement in the professionalism of the TV coverage. It was really entertaining. In fact, just before this show, I was watching the 30-minute playback of the race, just to sort of like try and see if there were. I watched the races to see if there were any incidents that I missed, and I look at a lot of things from the safety point of view as well as the competition point of view. But yes, the TV is great. Actually, I'm a big fan of the Peacock. So obviously, I watch the practices from the racetrack, but now my wife can watch practice and qualifying, and she gives me the lowdown on what's going right, what's going wrong. She's the boss. She knows what she needs.
Yeah, all credit to the Peacock app and channel actually, because even during the IMSA, during the 24-hour Daytona, you're gonna have people complain, of course, about anything and everything, but they did a phenomenal job, I thought, of showing the entire 24 hours of Daytona legitimately. Like, yeah, it had the side commercial. They did the same thing with the Indy race. It was just, even when a commercial was on, it would show off the side, but you still could watch the race in real time and not worry about missing anything, which is always one of the biggest issues as far as I'm concerned, as far as television coverage goes, because something always inevitably happens during a commercial.
Yeah, and obviously, the commercials pay for it all at the end of the day. So hopefully the fans are sympathetic to that. But yes, normally, although I've competed in a few 24-hour races as a fan, I typically don't watch 24-hour racing. But because it was on Peacock and I didn't have to think about what time there was going to be a bit of a TV slot, I would, come in from walking the dog, put it on, see where the race was at, go cook a meal, come back, see where the race was at. It's great. It's really great.
It's very nice.
Have it there all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually kind of begs the next question, because as I'm sure you've heard, there's been discussion lately about, could IndyCar benefit from a docu-series like Drive to Survive on Netflix for F1? And Pato, I read recently, was saying, well, it's almost like IndyCar is the world's best kept racing secret. They just don't get the same respect that they think they deserve compared to Formula One. Do you, in your opinion, and obviously we haven't even touched on any of the technical stuff yet, but in your opinion, do you think that the IndyCar series could benefit from something like that?
Absolutely. I think we have benefited from Drive to Survive. I think if you look at that survey that was just done recently, you'll notice that most of our fans are actually crossover Formula One IndyCar fans. So I think every time motor racing attracts a fan, it grows us. There's that statement that when the tide comes in, all ships rise. So I think it's been a benefit. Reality TV, my ex-boss Robin Hurd, he was very big trying to get into it, probably in the 90s. And I've always said that the best reality, having worked with Michael Andretti for a long time, I think that a reality TV show based around Michael Andretti would be the way to go.
Especially right now with him trying to get on F1. I think that would be a huge boost for both sides.
Absolutely. He's a legend. He's Formula E, he's Extreme E, he's got Road to Indy, he's IndyCar. Now he's pushing on this Formula One thing. He is Mr. Motorhead. Him and his dad are all about racing, and because of their Italian heritage, they have the on-off volatility that Italians have.
I wouldn't know anything about that, being half Italian.
There you go. And my parents are both Italian, and it's you lay everything on the table. It's really fun to watch Italians, and their arms go and they shout, and then 5 minutes later you're the best of friends all over again. It would be awesome.
Sure.
That would be
it's
awesome.
Not a lot.
And to Michael's credit, he has really built quite the business empire there at Andretti Autosport, especially now with the public offering for the IPO for Andretti Global, as well as some of the other business interests that he's got. So hats off to him, and he's never afraid to make changes within the team to strengthen it. I've noticed that over the years.
Don't forget about Australian supercars as well.
Oh, that's right. Sure. That's right. Thank you. I thank you for mentioning that. I nearly did overlook that. Now, kind of getting more into your role as the head of aerodynamics there at the IndyCar series. you were a major player in the whole implementation of the aero screen just a few seasons ago. And there was always, I remember when that was coming about, everybody was like, oh, why don't they go with the halo like F1 cars do? And I know there were some teething problems going through the development of that aero screen. What was your role in that? And how did that whole process of the development and implementation of that play out?
So it goes back to, let me see if I can get the year right, 2016. Jay Fry, as you know, had a lot of contact with Red Bull. He was the team manager of the Red Bull NASCAR team. And I was going back to England to see my family for Christmas. And he said, hey, can you drop in at Red Bull? They know that we're working, IndyCar are working on an aero screen, and they're working on an aero screen for Formula One, and they want to work together. So I was going between London and Leeds up the M1, and so I arranged to drop in. Had a very good meeting with them, and it all went quiet after that a little bit. At the time, our aero screen was literally a windscreen. It didn't have a structural top frame. It didn't have a roll cage, let's call it. And then there were some problems that came up with that, and so Jay resurrected the Red Bull thing, and we subcontracted Red Bull Advanced Technologies to design an aero screen to go onto our car, which had a roll cage. I prefer to call it a roll cage rather than a halo, because we're not really a halo. So it was a very, very short gestation period. Our top frame, our structure is 3D printed titanium, unlike the Formula One, which is
carbon fiber, right?
No, it's a tubular titanium.
Oh,
it's actually not tubular because they don't take a tube and bend it. They actually take a tube and they machine it down to a different inside and outside diameter. Then they bend it, and then they manufacture it. So we designed it to all the same loads. So it takes 150 kilonewtons. I think Jay has an equivalency in Chevy Silverados that you can put on it, which is like 30 or something. It's crazy strong.
That's a very American metric to measure it at.
It's incredibly strong. Like when we load test it, it is like, oh my God, I need to stand back, because if something breaks on this, we're all going to die.
We're going to lose limbs.
Every single top frame that we have manufactured, so it was designed by Red Bull, it was manufactured by Pankel in Austria, and it was actually welded together in Italy and machined in Italy. Every single top frame, even the ones that have been loaded up to 150 kilonewtons, are on race cars. None of them have failed. We have not elastically deformed any of them. A lot of people ask why did we go that route? One of the big concerns that we have, so in Formula One and most racing series, they don't race short ovals, they don't race at super speedways. So if you take Iowa as our example, it's one I like to take. The minimum cornering speed is 150 miles an hour. The wall is literally 10 feet away from the car as you're cornering. When you have an accident, if we had a parade at a track like Iowa, our cars are lapping at those speeds, 180 to 150 miles an hour, 7/10 of a second apart. So when we have a crash and we hit the wall, there's no slowing down before you hit the debris field. So you hit the wall at those speeds, there's going to be debris. We try very, very hard to contain the debris on our cars. We have tethers on everything. Everything is designed to not break apart in that situation, but they do. You can't take all that energy. And the big concern with just a plain halo is, something striking the bottom side of the halo and deflecting down into the torso of the car. So basically coming inside the cockpit. It's not necessarily a helmet strike. It's actually hitting a part of the body that is not at all protected, which is your chest. And the example I always look to put out there, because it happens occasionally, is like a CV joint. You have a CV joint break off, it's 1.5, 2 pounds, and it's the size of your fist. It bounces off the bottom of the halo, hits you in the chest, you're in big trouble. So that's why we want to really, we wanted to push very hard on the windscreen. And then we didn't want two configurations, one for the road courses and one for the ovals. Makes it a lot more complicated. The only real difficulty we had, and it comes down to the fact that we didn't have any historical knowledge of where the limit was being temperature in the cockpit. Early on, a lot of drivers complained that it was too hot. But all the teams now have cool suits. I think all the teams except one have cool suits that they can use, and I think that issue has reduced considerably. Now, we don't force them to use cool suits. That's a team choice. But on the road and streets where they work hard, they can run cool suits. So I think it's saying P out of the top 4, 2 of them are running cool suits. So it's not a performance negative to have the cool suit in the car. So
Gotcha. So did that in all those CFP calculations and so forth, when the aero screen was coming in and it was the new version of the Dallara chassis, did that change from your perspective any of the stuff from like the centers of pressure and things like that, as in terms of what the teams and the engineers were going to have to deal with overall setups, ride heights, wing angles, things like that changed that significantly?
It had a small effect on the aerodynamics. We tried to make the screen follow the natural streamlines that the air was going along anyway. So, it's a little bit wider and higher at the shoulder. So on a road course, it takes some air off the rear wing. So we lost a little bit of downforce on the rear wing. On the super speedways, we added a small amount of drag at Indianapolis. But the aerodynamic effects are actually quite minimal. The larger effect is people quote it as 60 pounds. It's actually 52 pounds. But it's a high center of gravity. So it puts a bit more weight onto the front of the car, about 1.5% more on the front. It's been a few years now since I looked at those numbers. But it transfers weight across the front. So your loaded front tire will degrade quicker because of it. And that is a sensation that the drivers see. And any weight on the car tends to make it feel a little bit more sluggish. What a lot of people are not realizing, I don't know if I'm sure you do follow Formula One. Formula One have just put their weight limit up by, I think, 42 kilograms, which is what,
something like that, yeah,
110 pounds, which is huge. And their drivers are starting to say the same thing. Car feels a bit more sluggish. And everybody, Pato Award obviously drove a Formula One car, and he was very excited about it, but he drove it in qualifying configuration. So the actual this year, so we're talking about 2022, with the new weight limit in Formula One, the start weight of a Formula One car is, if I get this right, is about 20 pounds lighter than the start weight of an Indycar. So they carry a lot more fuel at the start of the race because they don't refuel during the race.
right.
The actual starting weight of the car is not actually that dissimilar anymore. And unfortunately, safety, there's no way of increasing safety without actually increasing the weight. So every time someone argues to get weight down, get weight down, get weight down, the difficulty of achieving that and keeping the same level of safety is very, very small. And that takes us all the way back to attracting drivers. Roman did not want to race on an oval because he felt it wasn't safe. Jimmy Johnson didn't want to race on an oval because his wife thought it was unsafe. Both of those have now changed their minds because I think they see all of the safety features that we've put onto these cars over the last. It's been an ongoing thing for decades and decades, but I think we've made very big steps in the last since 2018. We containing all of the debris, so you don't see parts breaking off the car much anymore. The cars are strong, as I think we saw at Nashville last year. Mr. Ericsson had a rocket ship literally at the beginning of the race.
Yeah.
He tried to go
Scary,
to the moon, tried to go to the moon and still won the race. Yes,
Crazy.
I think if we do get the opportunity to do a new chassis, we could shave maybe 50 pounds off the weight of the car, but if we want to keep it as strong as it is now, you're not saving 200 pounds or 120 pounds or anything like that. And the other one, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of it, but back in 2018, we introduced structural side pods on the leading edge. So
yes,
so we have side impact now on the monocoques, which we've been pretty pleased with it because they have been added retro. They're not quite as good as they would be as if we did that from scratch. But Spencer Piggott, when he hit the attenuator at Indy 2 years ago, I think that was a testament there to both the aero screen and the side impact structures. That monocoque got repaired, by the way. It was not. It's not out of service.
Wow,
and was
that's amazing.
that is amazing. Was that also that side impact? It was some of that as a result of what happened with Hinchcliffe there from his bad accident. Was that already thought about at that point, or did that kind of accelerate the thinking at that point?
So Hinch's bad accident was the wishbone penetrated the monocoque. So a few things were implemented immediately. So there's a Xylon panel on the side of the monocoque, which has been there from the very beginning. But there was a little bit of a gap between the Xylon panel and the front lower wishbone rear leg mounting bracket, which is steel. And when the wishbone broke, the Heim joint broke, and it created like a sharp end where the threads are. It caught between the Xylon panel and the steel suspension mount, penetrated through the carbon fiber, and then obviously penetrated through his body. There was a fix for that by the next, at least by the next oval race. There was a fix in place for that, which we run to this day. But the aero screen needed also a big reinforcement. When you put these 36 Silverados on this top frame, we had to reinforce the cockpit rim of the monocoque as well, and which increased the strength. This car's had quite a few fractures of the cockpit rim in big accidents. And we have had no cockpit rim breakages since we've implemented the aero screen. That was done, the carbon fiber work was done here in Indianapolis by Aerodyne. Those guys did an absolutely fantastic job. The timescales were almost negative, and it's a fully tooled part, so it's most composites have like a rough surface and a smooth surface to them. This had to be accurate, smooth surfaces inside and out, and they had to be put onto. It was a retrofit to a lot of monocoques, and all of the top frames and all the windscreens are 100% interchangeable, which was a big worry that we weren't going to be able to retrofit this work and make everything interchangeable. And the stiffness of the car, I believe, went up 25%. So even some older monocoques that were starting to get a little bit flexible, you applied this retrofit to the monocoques, and they're so stiff that you can run. There are monocoques from 2012 that are still winning races.
Wow. Wow, that says a lot to your point, Tino, about the stiffness, the rigidity, the ability of aerodynamic to produce those components. Yeah, I'm thinking about this stuff as we're discussing aerodynamics, and you being the lead aerodynamicist for the IndyCar series. When in this, and forgive me if I'm off on the year, but I know when I believe it was in the introduction of the most recent chassis, the different engine manufacturers had a couple of different body kit options. Honda had one, Chevy had one. Where does that evolution stand now, especially with discussion that there may be another engine manufacturer, and there's discussion about the hybrid era coming in and a new car and all that stuff. But where does that stand in terms of the body kit specific to the engine manufacturer these days?
So I joined IndyCar like just before the aero kits came in. So I joined in the April of the year before the manufacturer aero kits came in, and we did those for 3 years. And there was a Honda kit and a Chevy kit, as you're well aware. If you remember, I think at the end of the first year we had to do a little bit of we allowed Honda to redo their road course kit. So we went to the wind tunnel in North Carolina, wind shear, and we impounded cars after the last race of the season at Sonoma, took them to wind shear, checked them relative to each other, and then allowed them to do the upgrades. When Jay arrived in 2016, both manufacturers sort of said that they really didn't want to be part. It was too expensive. It was getting prohibitively expensive for them to race aerodynamically and with engines, and that's when we went to the what I call the UAK18, the Universal Aero Kit in 2018, which is what we're running to this day. There was some talk last year when Ferrari were showing some interest of coming in, of opening up some of those areas again, like the front wing and the rear wing, and that didn't really go anywhere. So as I think, I'm unaware in the foreseeable future that we'll go away from the same aero kit for all manufacturers. It would need them to want to get back into that business. Saying that, obviously over the years we add options to the teams. So last year, if you remember at Indy, we added barge boards as an option. They didn't have to run them. Those have been extended this year to the short ovals, and will probably be extended to the road and street courses. So we're trying to give the teams, we're trying not to obsolete parts as we have to update stuff, and we like to give the teams options that they can play with, just like they have wheelbase options and suspension geometry options, and obviously they can pretty much do whatever they like with their dampers.
And talking about evolving the cars and whatnot, looking forward to, and you may not be able to speak on this quite yet, but with 2024 going to the hybrid engine of the 900 horsepower engine, have you seen yet or tested yet the differences of the aerodynamics of the cars with the new hybrid system, or how is that going? Where is that going?
Well, with more power. So typically we sort of have targets at mostly Indianapolis. On the road and street tracks, we're probably not going to change the aerodynamics much. We're not going to give the car more downforce or anything like that. We want the car to be hard to drive. We want the drivers and the teams to be the differentiators. So we like seeing fast hands. We like seeing guys having a bit of oversteer. You know, we don't want robotic drivers. We want skilled drivers.
Sure.
And we want the fans to see the skill. So short ovals and road courses, we don't necessarily want to see too much of a. We don't want to help them anymore with the aerodynamics. Super speedways, it becomes a little bit more difficult because obviously there'll be extra weight, which means tire wear, tire degradation, and with all the extra power, we still want the drivers to be able to follow reasonably closely so that they can try and pick up a draft on the straight and make the passes. So we follow that closely. We do a lot of traffic CFD work for Indianapolis. So multi-car, 2 cars, where we map the aerodynamics, not only of the wake of the leading car, we actually put a car behind the car to measure the forces on it. And we even run those maps in the simulator. We put drivers in the simulator and we ask them how this for following and stuff like that. So the current plan is that for Indianapolis, we would introduce a new rear wing and a new front wing to go along with the hybrid kit, which would probably be also at the super speedways, Texas, Pocono, if we ever go there, Michigan, if we went there, places like that. And that's really to give the teams the option to run a bit more downforce in the race to offset the extra weight and the extra power that will degrade the tires more. So we're trying to keep the tire degradation somewhat similar to what it is now, and we believe from our CFD studies that the following, normally you think if you put bigger wings on, you create a bigger wake, you hurt the following car. We believe from our CFD studies that we will have a similar racing quality to what we have now at Indianapolis with the extra power.
Wow, that's really interesting. So let me ask you this, Tino. So with the discussion about, kind of pushing back the hybrid era a bit, is that predominantly, does that have to do with supply chain issues? Is that something because there's discussion about another manufacturer coming in? What are all the factors involved in that decision, that whole process?
So I'm not 100% sure. I'm not the engine guy, so I don't follow the powertrain side of it that closely. But yes, at the end of the day, as you know, the world is in a big supply chain problem, and it's probably going to get worse rather than better with what's going on now in the Ukraine and might end up going on in the rest of the world. So electronics in particular has been very badly hit, as you've seen chips in road cars, and as you could imagine with a hybrid, there's a lot of electronics, and that's the holdup. The holdup's not the 2.4 liter engine side of it; it's all the electronics. But we're quite aware also that that's going beyond that. It's getting harder for us to get composite pieces made. It's harder for us to find materials to make stuff because all of the materials in our race cars are very, very high-end materials. Obviously people often think that being Indycar, we don't use all of the high tensile, the highest tensile and the best materials, but that's wrong. We use the best composites. We use the best steels, the best titaniums. We have to, because at the end of the day, running at an average of 232 plus in qualifying around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, everything has to be the best that you can get. it ends up being a bit heavier than, let's say, maybe Formula One use, because we crash at 232 miles an hour as well.
Right.
They don't have that ferocity of impact.
Right, right. No, that's 100% true. So would it be fair then to say that the supply chain issues I mean, from what you said, it sounds like it has some effect on, composite materials and things like that, that would kind of play more to your specialty of aerodynamics than it does than the engine side of things. So, but is that affecting things in terms of, the aero kits and all the other composite pieces that you would potentially have your eyes and hands on?
Yeah, there's no doubt. Most of our composites come from Dallara, and they are having a lot of trouble because they do many formulas, and they are having trouble supplying our current spares, let alone anything new right now. So we should have had our Speedway wings, our 2023, now 24 Speedway wings to test probably 4 or 5 months ago, and we just got them like last week. So it's all the way through, and I believe there are other racing series in the world globally that are probably going to announce very soon that they're pushing back some of their next updates as well.
Interesting. That's interesting, but that makes sense given everything that's going on globally right now. So when you get to that point of, say, you've got the 2024 wings in, like just this last week, so what is the process of which teams test these pieces? How do you make that call?
So with the 2.4 HY, that was decided by Honda and Chevy. So we produce one car set of bits for Honda, one car set of bits for Chevy, one spare set of parts, and they then work with their teams, and they nominate a team and driver to do the testing, because it's really powertrain testing. When we did the UAK 18, Honda and Chevy nominated their teams, but we insisted in that one that they used drivers that were not currently in the series. So if you remember, we used Montoya and Servia, who had both run at Indy that year, and all that testing was done post-Indy. So we're always trying to make sure that a team does not get a leg up with extra testing days over the other teams that could have an influence on the actual outcome of the races. It's a tough balance. It's a very tough balancing act to do, because every minute you're on track, you sort of learn something.
Well, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
You might not learn a lot, but you always learn something.
Oh, that's right. And if racers being who they are, whether it's Chip or Michael or Roger or anybody else in the paddock, they're always looking for any little advantage, even if it's only a single percentage advantage. They'll take any advantage they can get, however they can get it.
So what we do in that type of testing, so it's often the same thing. Like a few years ago, we've introduced new parts at Indy regularly for the 500, and it's impossible. We can't produce enough parts that everybody can test them. So we like to do a sign-off test on the track. We do simulation, we do CFD, we do wind tunnel testing, we do everything possible to make sure that every part that is designed will work out the box. But you really do have to do a track test to do the final tick the box, make sure there wasn't an unintended consequence. And so we have done testing like this where we can't invite everybody to the test. What we do in that situation is we run the tests. We tell the teams what they're testing, when they're testing. As soon as the testing is completed, we shut the test down. There's no track time beyond our testing. We make Honda and Chevy report to all their other teams. So we take all the data from the teams. The teams can't have any data from those tests. And we make Honda and Chevy share with their teams the results of that testing. So that's the fairest way that we think we can be to all of the teams out there. So often Honda and Chevy are our conduit to their teams to share chassis data.
Understood. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, doing everything you can to try to keep as level of a playing field as you can, I'm sure.
Correct.
So, excuse me, with obviously Dallara being the chassis, Dallara having the factory right across the street from the speedway. In fact, I was just down there this morning. I would imagine in your role there as the head aerodynamicist for the series, you probably are in regular contact with Dallara discussing whether it's updates, potential thoughts for new cars, bigger rear wings. I would imagine you're probably right at Dallara's hip in a lot of ways, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm the main conduit for IndyCar to Dallara. So we have bi-weekly periodic meetings with them. And I run the meetings, I do the agendas and stuff like that. So my background, although my title here is Director of Aerodynamic Development, my background is race car design. That's full race car design. Aeronautical engineering is, and the reason I did that in the first place, it is aerodynamics or fluid dynamics, but it's also lightweight structures. So my background after leaving university was actually lightweight structures more than aerodynamics. But when I got into racing, it was when ground effects was first coming out, was very early on. And so I worked for March Engineering, and I was steered back into the experimental aerodynamic side of it. So my background fits working with Dallara very well, because I understand timescales, how you manufacture parts, the ways of manufacturing the parts, like how you tool it, how you laminate it. And the performance side of a race car is 95% aerodynamics, so it just falls in very well. And I've spent a lot of time over the years at Dallara working with their guys in the wind tunnel. I know them all. They're all very good friends of mine.
Well, I can imagine with a career that you've had, you've probably got a lot of very good friends all over the globe from everywhere that you've worked. So kind of coming back to St. Pete then, because you said something early on in the show that made me think of this. So when you are at the events, what exactly is your role? You're certainly not in the steward's trailer, watching things live, but you obviously have a big vested interest in the competition and the safety aspects of it. So what exactly is your role on a race weekend at the track?
Well, if a race weekend goes well, I'm somewhat invisible. So obviously I monitor all the sessions. I watch the TV feed just like you. We get telemetry feed from all the cars, so we're monitoring what's going on with the vehicles. I inspect crash damage every time there's this is my sort of more structural side as opposed to my aerodynamic side. I look at how the parts fail. We try very hard to create a small amount of debris when we have accidents. That's for cleanup. So we understand that for fans, they don't mind yellows, but they don't like long yellows. So we endeavor very, very hard to make the race car parts such that they don't separate from the car and they're quick to clean up. So I'm always looking at things like that. I look at crash damage from a safety point of view. So next time we make a car or a wing or whatever, can we make it in a way that it's less likely to break apart, and possibly, any flying parts can hurt drivers, can hurt fans. We don't want parts flying over the fence and possibly catching the fans as well. So spend a lot of time doing that. So all of the crashes are photographed. I inspect all the photographs. I look back at the videos for which parts come off the car, and things like that. Indianapolis in particular, 2015, we had the backflips. I'm sure you remember those, the Chevy backflips.
I was going to ask you about that. I remember Ed Carpenter going backwards and upside down very vividly, and everybody was up in arms. They were halting practices and everything. Well, we need to have a fix for this. Oh, I definitely remember that. Yes.
Newgarden, Helio Castro Neves. There were multiple cars. So what a lot of people don't realize, that for Indianapolis, Dallara do stability studies. So in CFD, everything that we might put on a car, so you get in the wind tunnel, you can put parts on the car for straight ahead. Most parts on the car are designed for going straight ahead. Yes, that's the performance side of it. So, but then you spin. So we check the stability of the car so it won't flip over at 90 degrees of yaw when it's sideways. That was introduced by the technical director here back in the day, Les McTaggart, which was started when I think Dario Franchitti flipped over after touching Scott Dixon, Michigan. I think he got sideways, car flipped over. I was at Andretti. I think it was Andretti Green then. I was there. We do 135 degrees of yaw. So in theory, the car is most likely to flip at 135 degrees of yaw. So when it gets past 90 degrees and starts going backwards, that is theoretically the worst angle. In practice, it isn't the worst angle, but in theory, that is the worst angle. We investigate the car going backwards at 180 degrees, which was the flips that you saw back in 2015, which brought along the flippy flaps on backward. Then it was on the beam wing, and now we have them on the back of the underwing to hold the car down. That work had been done during that, before the race at Indy. The CFD work had been done. I think a lot of that was actually pushed back then by Nick Worth and when he was at Honda, but we couldn't actually make the parts in time for the race, but we knew that they would operate. And we also now do the car with it broken, so we do it at 90 degrees of yaw with the left front suspension broken off, no front wing, and the broken left rear suspension, because we get to the point sometimes when the car's broken where it wants to tip up. 2019, we had that a little bit. It didn't flip over, but it sort of bounced off the structural side pod and came back down. So we're always looking very hard to try and keep the car on the ground. I'm always looking on a race weekend at anything, the dynamics of all of those accidents, to see if there's something we need to be doing, especially as the car gets a little bit faster and a little bit faster and a little bit faster. What wasn't a problem last year can become a problem this year, and we might have to act on it.
When you're adding new bits to these cars and new structural parts and aero parts, what's the formula, or let's say the structure of how you get there to create these new parts, and seeing if there's a failure point, or, after a wreck, when you said before that you look at, what breaks, what's the process and all that? How does that work out?
Well, obviously there are standards that we have for all of these parts, and we have to evaluate on a constant basis whether those standards need to be made tougher. So everything is designed to a standard. As you can imagine, in this day and age, everything's done in finite element analysis, and designing parts to that standard is getting easier. It's getting easier and easier to get it right first time. But we're always observing the way things break and what happens in the spin, and to try and see whether we need to toughen up those standards going forward. And if we do decide we need to toughen the standards up, we don't always have the luxury of waiting until the next car, because sometimes for economic reasons there isn't a next car in the pipeline, or there isn't a significant update in those parts coming in the pipeline. And so then we look to see if we can economically retrofit the parts that the teams have in stock to improve that situation. An example would be drive shaft retention. So last year we started to notice, and this used to happen in the past, the drive shafts, when you break a rear suspension, the drive shaft should stay with the rear upright. Last year we noticed that was not always happening, and it was a bit of it wasn't a new thing last year, but we were just noticing it a little bit more regularly. So we went to Dallara and we said, hey, we need to work on this. We need to see what can we do to try and make sure the drive shaft stays with the upright, because the upright is tethered to the car. So when the wishbones break, the upright should not break away. And so we went through a number of iterations. They did a lot of static load testing over at Dallara LLC and Speedway. And this year we implemented pretty economical, and I think it's like $300 or $400 a car update to try and improve that drive shaft retention. So like Texas, the next race coming up, that's what I'll be looking for. Every accident, I'll be looking to see if I can see a drive shaft, which would tell us, if I do, that we didn't go far enough. We do have a path to go further. We don't want to go all the way in the first instance, because it would have obsoleted everybody's drive shaft. So the path to go further relies on the new drive shafts are being made to a higher standard, and we could force our teams to go to that higher standard sooner rather than lifing out their existing stock. And that's a big part of us getting our car count up. If we can keep the costs under control, we get more and more. It makes an easier, a more cost-effective path to entry. And at the end of the day, car count is a big part of entertainment. It's car density on the track is more entertaining. The more cars you've got, the more action you've got going on.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, nobody wants to see a 10-car race where, there's only two guys fighting at the end, even if that's the case.
Like the 2006 Indianapolis Formula One race. There's only 7 cars on the grid because of the tires or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and to your point too, Tino, about the half shafts, it's like, I've seen, myself, a number of, previous years 500s, whether I'm, there at the track or watching on television, somebody makes contact with the outside wall, say coming off a 4 or coming out of 2, and all of a sudden you see that drive shaft bouncing along, and it kind of goes back to the whole aero screen thing. That thing catches just right, and all of a sudden now you've got this drive shaft that's a projectile, and the halo may not have been effective enough to do that, whereas the aero screen will allow it to deflect and bounce away. So very good stuff. So with all that's going on, and the evolution of the series and the competitive nature of it, and the challenges you've got from a supply side standpoint, whether it's the composite manufacturing, the drivetrains, that sort of thing, what do you guys see, at least from your viewpoint there at the IndyCar offices, the biggest challenges that you and the series face moving forward?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
That's what we do here. We ask the hard hitting questions. I got more.
You know, it's a tough play. It's a tough position to be in because, especially in this day and age, there's so much media and opinions, and everybody's got an opinion. And sometimes you sit here and you think, man, these people obviously think that the people who are running the series and running the cars are a bunch of idiots.
Right, they don't know what they're doing. I could run it better, right?
And even the drivers, you know, they talk, they don't necessarily know the whole story behind everything. Everything we do is extremely considered, probably even more so than when I was on the team side. You have the economics, you have the logistics, you have the opinions, you have the safety, you have the competitiveness, the entertainment, cameras. You know, some of the biggest pain in the arse when we come to design parts is actually positioning cameras, and the TV producer doesn't like where the camera is. Well, it's not very easy to move cameras in a safe way. You know, back in the day when onboard cameras came on, you just like made a doubler and you screwed it into place. You got to remember that now when we don't have an onboard camera, there's a piece of ballast in that position to make it equal. Well, lumps of metal are not a great thing to have hanging off race cars. Cameras are sort of okay because when they're fragile, so when they come apart, when they come off the car, they tend to break into a million pieces, which isn't very dangerous. But you'd have a 1 pound piece of lead, that's not very nice. So now we tether our cameras so that.
Right, and especially if that 1 pound piece of lead is in the nose of the car, trying to get that really super cool network TV camera angle.
Right, and so those are all tethered now, and everything is not. It's not a case of, you know, bending a piece of metal and making something anymore. And the other thing you have to remember is, anytime we change a part, we have to make 60 of them. So let's take a composite part where you have one tool. You can only make one part a day, which means that anything you do is almost a 2-month lead time. That's without the tool. That's without making the tool in the first place. So you've got long lead times, and you know, let's go even further. You know, back to the aero screen. You know, we were the titanium top frame, the 3D printed titanium top frame. You know, we were probably at best making 3 every 2 weeks, so six or 7 a month. So now you go back and, you know, your lead time is 5 or 6 months from not making the decision, from making the decision to go ahead has to be made in, you know, June or July to be able to start testing stuff in January, or for all the teams to be able to go and test stuff in January.
Wow, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
And then obviously the supply chain thing can make it even harder. So we're always trying to think ahead. We're always planning ahead.
I would imagine you have to plan these lead times. I mean, I have a good friend of mine that does a lot of work with Metal, or the company out of California that I'm sure you're familiar with, and he's telling me, because they deal with a lot of the other manufacturers, you know, whether it's, you know, in Formula One, IndyCar, sports cars, Porsche, whomever, a lot of times they're looking at almost 18 months out, just from the planning and the go ahead and the tooling and being able to test and, you know, get these things out to where they're actually, you know, relatively bulletproof. So
that's definitely the case when it comes to parts that Metal or make. So an example of that is, I don't know if you remember at Gateway last year, we had a couple of dry flange failures. I think Pato Ward and maybe Herta. So with the extra power coming down the line, those two failures were more than likely car setup induced. But it just highlighted to us that maybe we were a little bit on the limit for when the 2.4 comes out. So we've been going through the process of doing a slight redesign there. The redesign has to be backwards compatible and forwards to be ready for going forward. And yes, those hubs, those axles, yeah, they're crazy. Again, Delar have them made by Pankel, but they're 8 months lead time before you can get anything. So we wanted to have some ready for Indy this year, just in case. There's no way we could get it done in time. We will have some ready for Iowa, but they're really 2.4 hybrid pieces, which we've pushed early, just in case there's a spate of these problems coming up in the future.
Sure. Go ahead, John.
So you mentioned before how the newer pieces are 3D printed now with the titanium printers. With the future, how many parts of these cars do you see continuing to be made from 3D printing, or is it just sort of sticking with traditional manufacturing practices, or do you see it going even more and more into the 3D printing side?
So 3D printing's very, very good for prototyping. So you can pretty much now make 3D printed parts that are strong enough for almost anything on the car. They're still somewhat size limited. So when you look at that top frame, it's actually 3D printed in 5 pieces, and then it's welded together, because that's how big the machine is.
That was my next question, so thank you.
A lot of the the plastic 3D printing is becoming very, very impressive. We have a very good deal partnership with Stratasys. They do a lot of stuff for us. Brake ducts, less structural parts. I think 3D printing is a little bit on the expensive side for Indycar for the metal stuff right now. The plastic stuff is great for proving things out. You can race, and some of our teams, a lot of the teams have got their own machines and they are racing some parts. Economically, if you're going to go into production where you might be making 100 parts, it's probably not there for us yet. It's still better to do things in composites, carbon fiber, or subtractive machining, CNC machining.
Gotcha. So with you getting ready for the next race in Texas, anything in particular that, aside from the drive shafts that we talked about earlier, that you're going to be particularly focused on? Any aspects of the cars or things that are going to go on at Texas? Obviously, being the oval that it is, the racing is really competitive. It's usually 3-4 wide going down the back straight and things like that. So there's, I'm sure, a lot for all of you guys to keep an eye on. But is there anything in particular that you're looking for coming up here at Texas?
So Texas is always right now our biggest problem at Texas is the PJ1, the NASCAR traction compound that they put on the high line. It has less friction, unfortunately for us, and they haven't reapplied the PJ1 to that high line. But it doesn't seem to go away. So we unfortunately have a situation whereby we've got a slippery high line. So in terms of competitive racing, that's a bit of a problem. Otherwise, from an aero point of view, it's always a balance to try and get a entertaining race without turning it into a pack race. We really don't like pack racing. It's very unsafe. You know,
I say, what could possibly go wrong?
You know, our cars are not NASCARs, and where you can crash, and we just don't want to be there. And it's a very difficult balancing act. So for this year, we've added, we've allowing them to run the barge boards that they were allowed to run at Indy last year, and they also have an extra tuning device for downforce, which is the sidewalls on the underwing and the strakes in the underwing. So at Texas, we typically don't allow the sidewalls or the strakes, and so we're allowing them what's called a trim sidewall, which is a part that they've had available for Indianapolis. So we're giving them a 10% increase in coefficient of downforce. It's probably going to be a bit of a cooler race as well. So that's probably going to add another maybe 6%. We typically like to do our steps in about 10% because we don't want to overload the tire either. So we're always in this balancing act between, as you can imagine, tire production has to happen very, very early as well. It takes Firestone a long, long time to make the tires. So places like Texas, Indy, we just have to try and work with Firestone to make sure that when we try to close up the race in a bit by adding some downforce, we don't overload the tire. And we have had, last year we didn't have it. We've had some since they reconfigured Texas. I don't know if you know, they changed the banking angle in turn 1 and 2.
I heard about that. Yeah.
2017, I think it was. Ever since then, we've had some difficulty getting side-by-side racing through turn 1 and 2. If it was me, if we'd known about this beforehand and they'd asked, I would have told them to reduce the banking angle in 3 and 4 and keep the banking angle in 1 and 2, so they could follow close in 1 and 2, pass down the back straight because it's straight. Right now we have more banking angle in 3 and 4, so we come closer together off 4, and everybody's trying to pass through the kink and into, therefore they can't pass in the kink. So when they get close enough, they do a banzai pass into turn 1, which, what could go wrong with that?
Exactly. I mean, almost it's a little bit like, you know, what we've seen in the past at Gateway, you know, Worldwide Technologies Raceway, where it's like, you know, all of a sudden there's a late, you know, bonsai move into the paperclip there, kind of a thing.
We try to, like at Indy, and this is much harder than to actually achieve than it is to say it. We like to see the cars show their move by about the pylon. So what the drivers like is they don't mind going into corners side by side. They just don't want someone to suddenly appear there as they're turning into the corner, and then they have to make a sudden steering change to avoid them or not avoid them. So if they can actually get alongside before they enter the corner, they can actually be a bit more gentlemanly to each other, or gentle lady to each other, to give the other driver room.
Right. Yeah. Getting surprised by all of a sudden someone down to the inside of you when you're already on the inside of the guy that you're crossing the stripe with. Yeah, I seem to remember over the past races at Texas. I mean, Graham's had that problem. Connor's had that problem. A number of drivers have. So interesting. Well, it'll be quite the race to watch. Texas always is. There's never a lack of drama going on at Texas.
And it could be very good this year, because I think we had 27 cars, and I can't remember. I think the last time we had 27 cars, there might have been 2011. So, you know, more cars on the track should be
We always love more cars. Any time that there's a series with a lot of cars in it, it's always better racing. It's better for the fans, as we talked about earlier. The competitors love it because there's always a race to be had. Whether you're racing for first or 12th. Interesting. So, all right, Tino, as we kind of hit the home stretch here, and we're getting ready to do kind of a green-white checker on the show here, just thinking back on your history, and I think back now with the IndyCar series running kind of that spec Dallara chassis, and the prior to the kart IRL split. Back in that day, you had different chassis manufacturers, right? You had Lola, you had Swift, you had a number of other manufacturers out there, and it was kind of like, and certainly, multiple engine suppliers as well. But it was almost the end of that era where, if it didn't work, you just built a better mousetrap. Nowadays there's to a strong degree, there's that ability to kind of build that better mousetrap is gone because everybody's driving the same mousetrap. So just from your experience and your history in the sport, is there a part of you that kind of wishes that it was still that way, where you could build that better mousetrap and not have to just run the same thing everybody else had and just out engineer them, or do you feel like the best and the brightest minds are going to prevail, whether it's the old way or the new way?
Both. Yeah, no, I think most people would love it that we were in an economical place where we could have chassis competition as well as engine competition. I think we'd all love to be there, but and maybe we will get there eventually if the economics works out. But at the end of the day, your latter comment is exactly right. The best will still always find a way to win they'll find a way to win through optimization rather than maybe innovative thinking. But let's take the engine for example. Based off St. Pete, it appears to me, not being an engine guy, that Chevy have made an improvement since last season. How do they do it? This engine's been around since 2012. You would think it would be very optimized by now, but they can look at the data and they can see that maybe they needed better fuel mileage or better throttle response or more top power, and they sort of like tune the little bits that are allowed to within the engine, the fuel mapping and way they inject stuff and whatever they do, and they manage to create these improvements. And the teams are doing exactly the same thing. They're working on their dampers, they're working on how they bring on their tires, how to make the tires work that little bit better, how to get the right feeling in the brake pedal. They're just constantly honing all of these things, and then at the end of the day, the cream does rise to the top. But on a good day, a small team, a Juncos or Coin, as we've seen over the last 2 years with Alex Palau and Roman Grosjean, they're more than capable of winning races. They're just not going to quite hit the highs as often as Roger and Michael and Chip and Arrow McLaren. But if they do get it right, they can go out and they can run right up front, and I think that's really, really great. I think that's the awesome thing about our series. And maybe if we went to multiple chassis manufacturers, I think if you go back far enough, all American racers tried to make their own chassis, and even Roger Penske, if you look back when the last time he made his own chassis, he had to switch to Reynolds to get competitive again.
That's right.
And maybe not many people want to take that risk anymore. It's not my department at the end of the day, but as you say, the whole thing is economics and engineering.
Well, and I think you hit on a really valid point, Tino, is that the smaller teams, whether it's the Coins or at the time is Juncos or even McLaren not that long ago, where they might have hit a sweet spot in the car that made it unbeatable or really at the sharp edge of the stick, so to speak, for that one race. But could they do it consistently? And those bigger teams, to your point, are going to find that sweet spot more regularly than the smaller teams. But it's there for the taking, and it comes down to the people and the brain power behind it.
And the other thing to remember, and it'll be, like you look at Formula One right now, and it's quite exciting because they come out with a big regulation change, and you're seeing quite a spread of side pod designs. How long is that going to take before they all look the same? So if they don't have a big rules change every year, so let's say they fix the rules for 5 years, probably years 2.5, 3, 4, and 5, if you didn't have a different color scheme, you'd probably have difficulty telling the difference between the cars. And we had the same thing with the Chevy and Honda aero kits. They sort of morphed to look exactly the same.
Yeah, there was a lot made of the differences in those two aero kits when they first came out, and then over the course of the season, and in certainly the second season, it's like nobody talked about it anymore because they did ultimately look almost identical.
Yeah.
So, and I think with the Formula One, all the livery and the car reveals and things like that. Yeah, it's been great to see with the new regulations there what the cars are looking like from their own design standpoint. But what I find to be one of the constants in racing, and I said this not long ago, it's like when the IRL kart split happened back in '96, it was all about the guys like the big guys, the Penske's, the Ganassis, all those guys, they keep winning because they're the richest, they've got the most resources, whatever. So we're going to make this spec series that it's going to level the playing field. Well, lo and behold, what happened? Penske came over and started winning almost straight away. Ganassi came over and started winning almost straight away. So I don't think it ultimately matters, and it maybe goes back to the earlier point or the question that I had asked you. It ultimately comes down to the team you've got around you and the brain power that you got working on it, because whether it's a spec chassis or everybody's got their own chassis, those guys are going to figure it out. And the guys that are good at it are going to continue to be good at it, no matter what vessel, so to speak, is put in front of them.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and thank you. See, I'm not as dumb as I look. So Tino, all right, I gotta this. I would be not doing the show justice if I didn't do a little bit of digging here with you, because you've been at this for a long time, right? All the way back to those Mark days in the early '80s. I gotta ask, and you've been around a lot of drivers, a lot of different types of race cars, a lot of different race tracks. Who is probably the biggest pain in the ass driver that you've had to work with? Not anybody in the current IndyCar paddock. I'll make that caveat.
All of them.
Drivers, that's the problem. They all want something they can't have, right?
All of them, yes.
All right, I fall into that category. And all right, Tino, that's the PC answer. And we're gonna have to have a side conversation on this because I know there's a real answer under there somewhere. All right, so along those lines, though, and I'll tee this one up for you. Again, not including drivers that are currently in the IndyCar field or grid for this season. Anybody that you've like your ultimate, whether they're still around or not, whether you've worked with them or not, it ranks at the top of your driver list that you've worked with. It doesn't matter what series, who have been at the pinnacle for you from your background and what you see and everything included, whether it's their just their raw pace, their demeanor, their ability to give feedback, whether it was that you knew it or not, and the whole package. Who is that for you? And you can have more than one.
Yeah, I'd like to do two. Obviously, Dario Franchitti, one of the most intelligent drivers out there. Like you just listen to his vocabulary. You could work out what needed to be done from his choice of word, because English has words, many words for the same meaning, but if you pick the right word, it means more. That's Dario.
Mm-hmm.
But the first driver that really that I really admired was actually Bertrand Gachot. So when I did Formula One, we didn't have as much telemetry or data, or it took us a lot longer to interpret the data back then. And he would come into the pits, and not only would he tell you what the car was doing from like an understeer, oversteer, traction point of view, he would also tell you which corners he picked up speed in and how much speed he picked up. And he was always right.
Love those guys. Gasho was one of my favorites too. I think I have a poster of him from back in those Formula One days. Kind of an overhead shot. But that's a really interesting observation, Tino, which actually sparks another thought in my head here. And I know we've taken up a ton of your time, and we'll try to wrap this up here quickly. You talk about Dario, and I think about that dream team at Andretti some years ago, where you had Dario and you had Dan Weldon and you had Tony Kanaan, yeah.
Brian.
And I think you even had Brian Herta. And then you also had Danica for a little bit. And that was when Danica was pretty fresh faced on the scene. I think that was maybe right after she drove for Rahal and had led that 500. But it was interesting to me to see, and you may or may not be able to speak on this, and I respect that. It seemed to me that as time went on and each of those drivers, whether it be Dario or Dan or Tony, left the team, it seemed like Danica continued to move rearwards in the field. And I always was of the opinion, and I never actually got to talk with any of them about this directly, but I was always of the opinion that those guys were so good at giving feedback on the car to the engineers, and all that trickled down to Danica's setup. And when those guys were gone, there wasn't that level of information and help going on, that Danica had to more or less, fend for herself. And she just didn't have that depth of technical knowledge to be able to give the feedback to the engineers to keep that car running where it had been previously. Is that a reasonable statement or a reasonable thing to think?
No, I don't think that's true. I was interesting because I was talking with Rocket about this morning, and Danica slipped back when IndyCar changed the regulations to be weight, where the driver weight got ballasted. So basically, a light driver was forced to carry ballast as if they were 180 pounds.
So I remember that was one of Robbie Gordon's biggest complaints when Robbie Gordon was still running the series too, was the whole weight thing. And
the reason I don't know why I started thinking this last night. Perhaps it's because we have Titania Calderon driving in the series again. But I sort of said to Rocket, I said, is it really fair that women should drive at the same minimum weight limit that a man drives at? Because physically, you could have a 120-pound lady and a 120-pound man, but at the end of the day, a 120-pound man is still going to be stronger than a 120-pound lady.
Mm-hmm.
Physically.
So I was going to say straight physics on that.
A lady can go to the gym and they can train and whatever. It's just genetics. They're never going to have the strength that the man will have. And so Danica's performances dropped significantly when she had to basically race at the same weight that the men were racing. And it was just an ad lib thing I said to him this morning, saying, there's no other sport in the world that I know of that women compete with men at all.
Right. That would be like a female playing pro football in the NFL, right? or basketball or baseball or any other sport that's predominantly men anyway.
So I just don't know. They don't play golf against each other. As a handicap, I think you give the lady a bit of a head start, but they don't play tennis together. They don't do athletics together. There's always a class for women and a class for men, which I'm not saying that that's what we should have. My question to him was, should we allow women to maybe have a 20 or 30 pound benefit in the weight? So I think that's when we saw Danica find it harder. I think the weight helped her because it compensated for the physicality side of it.
Gotcha. And when you asked that question of Rocket today, what was his response?
You'll have to ask him. He wasn't against it in any way or form.
Gotcha.
To be honest, I'll tell you, he said that he actually thinks that his personal opinion is that the minimum weight of the car should be without the driver, like we used to do it.
Gotcha. Interesting. Very interesting.
And I don't know if I agree with that or not, but at the end of the day, I just threw out this thought that maybe we should give ladies a bit of a leg up by allowing them to have a slightly lighter car.
Gotcha. Well, that would be an interesting conversation to have, moving forward, especially if we get the likes of, Catherine Legg back, on a more regular basis and other females for that matter. All right, John, anything else for the good of the whole, my friend?
No, thank you for coming on. It was really interesting to talk to you. I'm super into the technical side of stuff when it comes to racing, so this was really enjoyable for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, and hope your listeners enjoy it.
I have no doubt that they will, Tino. And is there, from your standpoint, is there anything that you wanted to discuss that we haven't covered yet, or is it something that we missed in our discussion here this afternoon?
Oh, I'm sure we missed lots and lots of things, but I can't think of them right now.
Neither can I. This is the penalty of age, right? Is that all these great things come to our minds, but they don't stay there. Will you be in Long Beach? I would imagine. Yes.
Yeah, I do. I go to every race.
I had a feeling you did. I just wanted to make sure I was not assuming something that may not have been true. Well, hopefully I'll be able to catch up with you there because I'm expecting to be in Long Beach as well. So perhaps we can catch up and I can shake your hand and thank you in person. So my sincere thanks to you. I know you're a busy guy. I know we had to get super top secret clearance from your boss Dave to make sure that we could do the interview, but and I tried to take it as easy as I could, but I enjoyed thoroughly the technical discussion with you, and am so appreciative of somebody in your position being able to carve out a few times for a couple of little guys like us with a little motorsports podcast. So thank you very much, Tino. Appreciate it.
Come and find me at Long Beach.
Will do. And in the meantime, folks, again, Tino Belli, the director of aerodynamics for the IndyCar series. Fantastic discussion. Thank you so much, Tino. I will look forward to seeing you in Long Beach. And as soon as the episode's edited and uploaded, I'll be sure to let you and everybody there at the series know. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Very much. And you.
Thanks. Take care, Tino.